Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. We'll be dropping the link to the song we just played, which is called Oh Storyteller by Suad Massi, an Algerian Amazigh songwriter and guitarist. And we chose this song today as we thought it was fitting for the theme of today's webinar, as we want to acknowledge the important role that storytelling in oral history plays in the transference of knowledge and meaning making throughout the Arab region and, of course, beyond. Again, welcome. My name is Basima Sizemore, and I'm a senior researcher in the Global Justice Program at the Othering and Belonging Institute at UC Berkeley. And I am the co-designer for the Arab Women Feminist Visions for Equity and Belonging webinar series. The webinar series is the first activity of the Global South Lab, a new area of work at the Othering and Belonging Institute. And it's our pleasure to have you join us today for the second session of this series. Today's webinar is going to focus on the role of Arab women and feminists from the region in knowledge production, including education, the arts, and cultural expressions, as well as their contributions and interventions, and how their work engages the rich and complex social, political, historical, and contemporary issues, identities, and context of Arab societies and peoples of the region and its diaspora. Before I continue, I would like to take a moment to make an acknowledgement regarding this series, in that in designing this series, we've strived for a diverse representation of topics, struggles, geographies, identities, including ethnic and cultural identities, expertise, lived experiences, and histories as related to Arab women and feminists of the region and diaspora. And we fully acknowledge that this series barely scratches the surface of the many topics and peoples that can and should be centered in these conversations. We acknowledge that there are many people and communities and issues to include and conversations to be had, including the collective identity of the region and its very diverse population. Each session is designed to provide a small window or glimpse into the immense diversity of Arabs, Arabic-speaking peoples, and ethnic groups of the region that create the rich cultures, identities, histories, social and political fabric of the 22 Arab countries that span from East and North Africa to West Asia, which constitutes what we know as the Arab region. We would also like to acknowledge our OBI colleagues on our communications team and Lara Haboub on the Democracy and Belonging Forum team for their collaboration and support on this series. And we'd also like to thank the Sultan program of the Center for Middle Eastern Studies at UC Berkeley for partially funding this webinar series. And to thank, of course, our incredible speakers and moderator for being here with us today and for participating in this event. I'd now like to invite my dear colleague and Global Justice Program Director, El Sadiq El Sheikh, who is a co-designer for this webinar series, to introduce and to provide some context to the Global South Lab, which is the container for this webinar series. El Sadiq, please join us.
Thank you, Basima. Hello, everybody. So in OBI, we always believe that belonging must be a global norm. And to advance such a radical imagination of belonging, we must, among other things, bridge with different people and geography we often don't talk to or know, in order to shift the singular narrative, which is usually exclusionary, to plural, inclusive, and global narratives. And to support a goal like this, we developed the Global South Lab, past, present, and future of world making, to do two things. One, to embark on a large scale of global bridging, to familiarize ourselves with the Global South past, present, and their future visions. And number two, to support a narrative shift that is globally inclusive by bringing diverse practice, visions, and new social political development from across the Global South. And we hope by doing this, we aim to facilitate mutual learning and bridging among Global South people themselves and their institutions, and between them and the global community. So in brief, our lab central question is the following: can we imagine a world where the historical, and contemporary practice of more than 85% of the world population, which is Global South, play an essential role in shaping the actionable visions that define today's and tomorrow's global governance. We believe answering this question is not a theoretical exercise, but is a practical step toward improving people's life worldwide and preserving our planet. However, to answer such an inquiry, we need to know what the historical and contemporary practices and visions of world making exist in a global south. So in that sense, our lab aims to grapple with such inquiry by bringing diverse practices, visions, and new development, whether they're social or political, from across the global south to facilitate multi-scalar learning and bridging among the global south people and between them and the global community. So our fundamental goal is to serve as a knowledge and multi-activities hub to unite history to the present in order to imagine the future. And we intend to do this work by three ways. One, to facilitate various and different online discussions and conversations. This will feature Global South thinkers, movements, institutions, and network, and will cover different thematic issues that are informative to Global South and global citizens. And the second, to introduce old and new knowledge produced by Global South through thematic webinars and panels on diverse themes, such as today's webinar series on women and Arab women. And also we will provide different type of panels and lectures on political and social theory, contemporary issues, and literary work. And we will conduct interviews with intellectuals and authors and invite also reflective pieces. And all this will be in our website for the project, which is still under construction, and hope you visit to see it probably in a couple of weeks. Finally, our hope for the lab is to feature emerging novel solutions and new networks and spaces from the Global South at the local, national, and regional levels, to be an incubator space geared toward building new narratives and vision for a world of inclusivity and belonging. I hope that you will be able to follow our activities by just coming our website to find links to upcoming events, archival events, and also all the stuff that I mentioned. And thank you. Back to you, Basima.
Thank you, Sadiq. And I'll just piggyback and underscore that the intentionality behind the Global South Lab and this series, this webinar series, both are part of a larger effort at the Other and Belonging Institute to create platforms where global citizens can learn from each other, contribute, and co-create common strategies that envision a future where everyone and everything belong. So to tee up this webinar series a little bit, this three-part public webinar series, we had our first session last month. Our series entitled Arab Women and Feminist Visions for Equity and Belonging focuses on Arab women and feminist-led efforts and their essential roles within society, the region, and diaspora in shaping civic life and social and political progress. Women and feminists throughout the region and diaspora representing different countries, lived experiences, struggles, and identities will share their knowledge and expertise in advancing social and political change, efforts toward genuine democratization, women's rights and gender justice, food sovereignty, land rights, and much more, while simultaneously centering their voices and demands for rights, equity, and justice for all. And so this is part of an invitation and effort to center Global South perspectives and voices that are often underrepresented. And for this series in particular, we want to reflect the priorities of Arab women and feminists, their visions, values, and strategies toward equity, justice, belonging, and world making, as well as to broaden narratives and perspectives beyond a Western narrative and public opinion pertaining to women of the region, Arab and Arabic-speaking peoples, societies, and the Arab region at large. And as I wrap up, I have a quick note on housekeeping that I want to share, in that we'll have 15 minutes of Q&A after the conversation and with the speakers and the moderator. And so we invite everyone to drop your questions in the chat throughout the conversation, but there will be 15 minutes aside to bring your questions to the speakers and to have those answered. And please don't be shy. We always get wonderful questions from the audience, and it's a great opportunity for engagement. With that said, I'd like to transition us to our conversation with our incredible speakers. And I'll start by introducing our moderator for today's session, Hanan Tokan. It is my honor to be able to welcome and invite Hanan to moderate this session. Hanan is Associate Professor in the Philosophy, Politics, and Economics program at the American University of Beirut, Mediterraneo in Cyprus, and Associate Professor of Politics and Middle East Studies at Bard College, Berlin, which she is currently on leave from. Her research sits at the intersection of Middle Eastern studies, international politics, critical theory, political theory, colonial, post-colonial studies, and visual cultures. Her writings are concerned with the political and social roles art and cultural institutions play in our lives, the functions of art in international politics, museums and exhibitionary practices, migration and the movement of art objects, and the politics of knowledge production in and about the memories, displacements, racializations, histories, and ecologies of Global South contexts. Hanan, I welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Basima. Thank you so much, El Sadek, for this wonderful introduction. And I just want to begin this evening's events by thanking the OBI, for organizing this event and pulling together such an amazing group of speakers. I'm grateful for that. I would like to begin, before I begin the conversation, I do want to first introduce our speakers. Their long bios are already up on the website, I think, and the invite to this event. So I will not be doing them the justice of, for their amazing work, but I will try, for the sake of time, introduce them briefly. So I'll start with Manal. Manal Al-Dowayan is a leading contemporary artist from Saudi Arabia whose practice reflects the transformative energy of a society in flux. She works mostly with photography, sound sculpture, and participatory installations, and interrogates gender norms, social justice, and the intersections of memory, identity, and cultural change. She's exhibited at major institutions, including the Guggenheim and the Royal Ontario Museum, the LA County Museum of Art, and many others. She's also represented Saudi Arabia at the Venice Biennale. Second up, we have Suban Noor Cooley, who's an assistant professor of African American and African Studies at Michigan State University. Suban's research, storytelling, and teaching blend the rhetorics of identity and belonging, cultural and digital literacies, and feminist theory to help build understanding and broaden perspectives of how we define and value all forms of writing. Third up, we've got Mina Suilem, who's a feminist activist from the Western Sahara and a co-founder of Feminist Consciousness, Nahu Wa'i Nasawi. Her activism is rooted in intersectional solidarity and grassroots movements, emphasizing decolonization and social justice. Mina is also deeply committed to the production of feminist, queer, and decolonial knowledge. Thank you so much, the three of you, for being with us this evening. This evening in my time, my time zone. I'm going to be asking you a series of questions, and I think the best thing might be to go always in order of Manal answering first, then Suban, and then Mina, just to make things a bit maybe more organized and easier. I guess I'll just begin with my first question then for the evening, where I'd like to ask each of you to briefly begin. Let's say I'd like to ask each of you, to begin the evening's conversation by briefly describing the journey that led you to your current work. So was there a particular moment or experience that inspired you to engage in feminist knowledge production? If you could tell us a little bit about your personal trajectory and how you got here, so to speak. So if we can start with Manal, that would be great.
Hi, hello everyone. So my personal journey, it's a very long story. I'll try to compress it into a very tiny one. I originally wanted to study art when I finished high school, and there was no art economy in my country. There was no galleries, no museums. Actually, there was not a woman artist in Saudi Arabia that I can look at and say, I want to be like her. And so I decided, along with my family, to study computer science, and I have a master's in that. Later, I continued to pursue my passion. I made art regardless of nobody there to see it. And then eventually, a small exhibition happened here and there. And then I launched my art career, and I was able to say I'm an artist. I later went on to get my master's degree at the Royal College of Art and Contemporary Art Practice in the public sphere. My art really is a combination of different things that happen, but I think for this talk, I want to focus on my participatory artworks. And participatory artworks are art that includes communities. I started off specifically with women, but then eventually moved on to larger communities that included men, women, children, of every kind of shape, form. My question in my practice is I always look at the politics of visibility and absence. I also recognize that there were gaps in representation of our stories, especially Saudi women. They were fragmented or mediated by somebody else. Somebody was telling our story on our behalf. And so that sort of started me to think about how do I work with my communities. In women communities, specifically, storytelling is the core. It is how they transfer knowledge. And I started looking at how to make their voices more material. The collective memories of women having materiality, like a physical form. I found within my journey that art can disrupt dominant narratives. That gave me so much joy. It occupies spaces. And I found that in my participatory work, communities can become authors alongside me. That's my story.
Thank you so much, Manal. That's fantastic. I'll come back to press you on some of this. I want to hear more about it. It's very exciting. Next up, Suban, if you could have a go at the question.
Absolutely. So I came to my work, I was in a PhD program in rhetoric and writing and studying Somali women, Somali feminists in the digital sphere. And I had this moment. I was like, how, I was born into the Somali diaspora. I've spent most of my life outside of Somalia, and I'm someone who is still deeply shaped by my cultural identity as a Somali. But how did I come to understand what it means to be Somali outside of Somalia? So as Black feminist scholar Audre Lorde says, to whom do I owe the woman I have become? And the pivotal moment for me that sparked my research was a visit. My parents live in Australia, and I went home to visit them, but they had just moved from a house I'd known into another house, a new house. And when I walked in, it felt like home. And so I started to ask myself the questions. I said, what is it exactly? What's happening in this house that is making it feel like home? I was struck by how my mother, probably not intentionally, right, which is why I call it semi-conscious, had turned the house into a betokening of Somalia, a memory of Somalia. It smelled like home, smelled like, incense and food. I'm speaking in my mother tongue, where I'm just experiencing the space and realizing that this is a small haven, a small, betokening of my nation, of my community and culture. So that personal experience took me on an academic journey to understand how many Somali women are doing this across the diaspora and how many countries. So I literally did a cross geographic. I went to Australia because that's where I grew up. Italy because it was our colonial empire, it was our colonizer, and then Kenya because it's a neighboring country, to see what was happening in these houses and get an understanding of essentially what these women were doing. This not even knowledge production, but preservation, really, so that those of us who don't have access to the home country still know, have semblance of who we are as a Somali outside of Somalia. So
thank you so much, Suban, for sharing that. It's truly wonderful to hear about sort of these affective experiences you describe. And again, I hope we go back to them in the conversation. Mina, you're up next.
Thank you, Hanan. Hi, everyone. And I'm also very, very inspired to share, having heard from Suban and Manal, such amazing journeys. My journey started mainly due to the context that I'm in. I'm someone who is North African. I come from a lot of identities that are so weaved together that sometimes it's really hard to identify yourself amongst them. And when I was young, the feminist specifically knowledge that was provided, or at least that was accessible to me, made it seem like it was a bit harder to connect it to the context that I'm living, like the lived-in experiences that me, younger women, and even older women from different generations in my context are living and are talking about in the different circles that I'm in. And that, with the support of various colleagues and friends in different conversations, in these sittings that we usually have in the culture, which is where a lot of knowledge is being made, we started to think how we can create something that is actually that visibilize what we are living, how to make this personal experience visible in knowledge, and how can it be more accessible to other folks from the masses that come from different privilege backgrounds. Especially when it comes to privilege here, I want to insist that when it comes to privilege, there is also privilege with education. And this was very, very clear to me when I compare the knowledge that I can read and I can understand and I can share, compared to other generations in my culture, women who weren't able to finish, for example, elementary school, women who only were able to go to the Quranic school to learn just the alphabet. And from that, the idea came in that how we can make this knowledge that we are receiving more accessible, and how we can also transfer the knowledge that we are sitting in, the stories that we receive from our mothers, from our aunts, from the people in the streets. How can we also transfer them to lived in knowledge that other people can access and can understand? And the project that I'm in started actually with just Western Sahara and Mauritania, 2 countries in Northwest Africa with very, very similar social structures and very, very like a lot of shared knowledge, a lot of shared language and customs. But it grew to this project that is now being shared all over Botswana, with folks contributing and with folks giving a try to produce the knowledge from their own context. That is where the journey started. And my passion with also knowledge production in all its shapes and forms, and how we can also transfer the traditional view that we have of knowledge, of books, to something that can communicate and can translate the lived-in experiences of the people in our communities. And that's when we started in with the goal that we want to facilitate the knowledge that is coming from this region. We want it to be more visible. Another factor also is that specifically when we talk about North Africa, it is a very, very complex region with a lot of different identities and languages as well. And usually before, what we were receiving, especially when we talk about the Middle East, the knowledge was often generalized. So you'll have one report that says this applies to every single country and community that is in the Middle East. And it's often led to a lot of us trying to correct people about our identities, correct people about, yes, this does exist in the region, but exists in a very different community, very, very far away geographically from us. And that's when the journey started. We're trying to create this base of knowledge from the region that speaks our language, that makes it visible, that makes our stories visible, but also make our space in the knowledge production sector right now, specifically the feminist sector. But that's it. I'll stop here. Hanan, back to you.
Thank you so much, Mina. That was really helpful. And actually, 3 of your answers lead maybe to my second question, which is related to your introductions about yourself. So here I'm going to be asking you about the context, interventions, gaps, or needs or highlights what your work's sort of what your work intends to highlight, right? So you kind of all brushed on, who you speak to and who you engage with. I was hoping now you could sort of go into it a bit deeper and maybe even give us some examples of the kinds of works that you're doing, just to give the audience sort of maybe a wider understanding, not a wider understanding, a more specific understanding of what it is, of how it is that you're addressing some of these issues. In particular, things like women's rights, the questions of women's rights, gender, the equity, the feminism in your work and where it lies. I mean, think maybe about a project that you'd like to share with us, or just generally how these questions drive your work. Maybe Manal, start with you.
Yes, I'll go first. Well, Hanan, so definitely the things that I grappled with in my work are how I address the idea of absence, how to look at these gaps of representation that you're talking about, and where does the art live in these spaces? And so a lot of my projects have really leaned on, first of all, creating a space for myself, a safety, because I started making participatory art before I knew there was academia written about it, and that it belonged to a certain history of language. And I just did it instinctively. And my instincts took me to women-only spaces. I grew up in places where multi-generations, my grandmother, cousins, aunts, we all sit in one room and discuss. And sometimes it becomes larger numbers of women. So these spaces for me were very, very safe. I used the collective voice as a way to convey what I wanted to say, but I always say, if somebody were to invite you to sing on the stage alone, I would die. I have a horrible voice. I would, be a terrible singer and really hurt your ears. But if I had a collective group that sang together, that's when it becomes beautiful, it becomes safe, and there's a shared experience. I'll give an example of some of my projects that I have worked on. But these, you have to remember, I live in a country that has transformed significantly in very short time. So now most of my artworks and the things that they used to address are historical. For example, there was a point in Saudi Arabia where women's names were not mentioned in public. It was a sort of a red line. You would be called the mother of, or my wife, but never your name uttered. And I used this as a starting point of thinking about where are women made absent and how they're erased, and how once you remove a name, you don't allow her face to be seen in newspapers and on TV, it slowly allows the dehumanization. And so I just took I had a huge project called Ismi. I was watching a comedy show, a candid camera show about 15 years ago. And that comedy show would go up to men in the street and ask them different questions. And then they sneak in the question, and what's your mother's name? And then, I almost said it. Thank God I didn't say it. And I remember I was sitting next to my mother. I'm like, I can't believe this is a show. This is considered comedy. And so I decided to create a project called Ismi, where I invited women in women-only spaces. So I was hosted. Nobody knew what contemporary art was. They didn't know where my work would go, but they knew that I was their daughter, the daughter of their community. And so at different places like vocational training centers, women's universities, charities, opened their doors for me for free to run my workshops. And in these workshops, I would just go up and show them the video. I'm like, what do you think? And everybody's like, angry. And I didn't know these were just new. And I had a microphone. And during my talks, my microphone was requested. Like the women in the participatory workshops were like, give me the microphone. And they wanted to say something. They really wanted to protest. And I told them, so how about we write your names on beads, wooden beads made of maple wood, put your full name on it, and we will stitch them together. About 600 women participated in 3 major cities, the Eastern Province, Center, and the West. And I promised them that these works would travel the world with your names exposed to the world. And that was one of my first ever participatory works. That gave me a lot of power to just continue. And I started thinking about other participatory projects, but I started thinking about what I was doing and what I was collecting. And I was creating an archive, a messy archive, a lived archive, maybe, and that was the beginnings of the ideas of creating weird archives, not the ones that we're used to, the ones with the book sitting on the shelf. These are fine, we respect them, but I think art has a space that fills these gaps between the official narrative about women and what women really say about themselves. I love that these archives that I'm creating are messy and they are alive and they are lived experiences. Yeah, I think that answers your question, Hanan.
It does, Mana. Thank you so much. I'm very interested in the question of the archive, and I'm so happy to hear that, actually we can be as young as you are and still be living archives ourselves. So this is fantastic. So much probably to think and speak about that. Sivan, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. So the things I'm grappling in my work are directly the negative representations of Somali and Black Muslim refugee and migrant experiences. When you search for Somalia online, you're met with images and narratives filled with tropes of conflict, of hunger, drought, terrorism. So I'm really committed to what Kevin Kwashi refers to as Black aliveness, the Black aliveness of cultural preservation, focusing on how women of the Black diaspora communities enrich our lived experience. So using a transnational Black feminist understanding of how Somali women serve as carriers of culture across borders and geographic distances, I personally examine how memory functions as a site of cultural preservation when the physical homeland is inaccessible or dramatically altered by conflict. The cultural carrying is something I view as both conscious and semi-conscious, as a practice among the Somali women elders in different diasporic settings. So kind of all over the world. I'm also kind of grappling with the reality of this burden of carrying culture in the diaspora. At home, no one thinks about the pressures of maintaining the being of a culture. You're not thinking, Manal in Saudi Arabia is not thinking about what it means to be Saudi. If I'm in Somalia, I'm not thinking about what it means to be Somali. But that outside of the home country, there's a growing responsibility to maintain, and preserve these cultural practices, while also working to build life in a new place, a new geography. So my concern, the thing I'm grappling with and finding out is whose work is it to remember? Whose work is it to do that? And I know the answer, but I'll save that for another question.
Thank you so much, Sivan. I really love this idea of carrying culture and living it and how we can bring it to the fore and the reasons actually behind your work for doing that, and how needed it is in the media environment we're living. Anyway, Mina, go ahead.
Thank you, Hanan. I'd say the thing most that we grapple with, especially in the knowledge production movement or the feminist movement that is Arabic speaking, is the nature of the political context that we live in, and reflecting also on the experience of myself and the collective that I come from. It is really, really hard sometimes to continue that passion of writing or continue that passion of focusing on these shared stories, these new aspect of sharing or let's say profiling a concept and trying to share it in a very easy understood language when the world beside you is burning, basically. It's really, really hard. You'll be working with colleagues sometimes, with collaborators, and they will disappear because they are living this and this and this. The political context in the region is one of the first and the almost like control that we all suffer under. The passion is also affected because your survival comes first in all of these narratives. You'll be talking mostly about how you're going to be surviving these next steps. Are you even going to be talking to your comrades next, or colleague, your sisters in the movement? So that's one of the many things that we grapple with at the moment. Something else also is the issue of accessibility and the issue also of engaging people in knowledge production. The project, like one of the projects that we had that was a goal initially, is to encourage people from the region to share their stories in written. Sometimes, especially in the culture, it's very, very easy for you to send a message to someone and say, hey, how do you feel about this? Have you ever struggled with this? And they'll be like, I can do a phone call and I can talk to you for 3 hours. It's very, very easy. But when you ask them to put it in writing, they'll be like, oh no, but I'm no writer. I cannot do that. The idea of becoming a writer in the culture is very, very hard and complex also sometimes to accept. And one of the projects that we had is to actually nudge people to just like, this is a really good idea. Just put it in writing and we can follow you along the way. And through that, we have produced so many amazing pieces that reflect lived-in experiences that showcased struggles of race, struggles with class, struggles with identity also in the region, with very, very simple, but also at the end, very beautiful and personal language. And it was that tug of war, like, you're trying to get people to write, but they're also saying they're not a writer. And sometimes at the end, people be so surprised of the outcome, like at the end result. This is a whole piece. You have written all of this by yourself. And also something else that is very, very challenging in the knowledge production movement in the region is the issue of identity and the issue of trying to highlight that we all come from different identities. In the region, it's still a very, very fresh, let's say, discussion and a struggle. Sometimes people don't accept the identities that are not usually showcased, or at least the most visible. When it comes to us, the one thing that we struggled with, but now it become at least more accepted and normalized, is saying that we are not necessarily Arab, but we are Arab speakers, because we come from different identities and we have different roots in different cultures. I might have some Arab culture in me, but I don't necessarily identify myself as Arab. And when you're writing in Arabic, when your whole movement is also based in the Arabic language, you struggle with that. But people will say, but you speak in Arabic, you write in Arabic, and your whole activism is in Arabic. How can you not be? And so that's one of the main issues that we have faced so far. When starting in knowledge production, it's the issue of highlighting some of these hidden identities or hidden struggles within the context of the region. But yeah, political, also accessibility, and I would say even the motives for people to engage with knowledge production. And third of all, it's very, very also still a fresh start for highlighting different identities in the region.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mina. So again, you're taking me to my next questions. I actually have one specific one for each of you, sort of related a bit to what you spoke about, and maybe your sort of biographies that you summarized to us as well. Maybe I'll start with Manal. So Manal, you live in the UK, you said, right now, correct?
I'm right now in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
But I live between UK and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly. So you live in the diaspora. You can say you partly live in the diaspora. Yes. And you have one foot based in the UK and the other in Saudi. And I guess I want to ask you how you navigate about in representing your work across these borders, not only Saudi Arabia and the UK, but also sort of between the generations themselves in each of these contexts, right? Yeah. And are you also in London? Because of course, where you are in the UK makes a very big difference, right? London as opposed to maybe other cities. So that would be interesting for you maybe to share with us as well, what it means to produce work in a global city like that, as well as a Saudi woman there. So yeah,
well, I'm not living only between London and Saudi Arabia as an artist, and contemporary art now is a very global sort of community. So there is sort of a movement constantly, whether it's your artworks that are moving or it's you physically. And some Zoom and platforms like this have really expanded access to artists all over the world. I think living in this situation, in this state, is, I would put it as I'm in a constant state of translation. So I'm constantly translating my context. I'm translating expectations, translating memory, in order to really bring across my art, and so it connects to everyone. I try to make sure that a mother that lives in Saudi that does not know nothing about contemporary art understands what I'm trying to say. And at the same time, if a curator in London who would usually try to exoticize my work as feminist Arab art or something like that, and make sure that she also understands what I'm trying to convey with my works. Multi-generational work is also very important in my projects, as I always try to engage every age group, every community. And that also is for me a unique language, because feminism, activism, this is completely different, and it's in the way it's presented in my society. And sometimes it's just through whispers, through resilience, through handing down certain traditions. And that for me is very sensitive work. And this is where I play in the little small spaces where, you just explore them and be curious about them. What else I have? I say maybe the way I present. So can I continue? Yeah, I have 1 second. Okay. So I'll give you an example. In art school, my professors would tell me that my artist statements were too flowery, too much poetry. I need to say what you want to say, Manal. Get to the point. And it took me a very long time to understand that this is the language that I grew up with. We use poetry, we use flowers, because everyone in my society is trained to read between the lines. They can understand what I'm trying to say through metaphors. Whereas in the West, they really just want, the direct sort of conversation. And it's a very big struggle for me to try to pull myself out of, in my world, in my society, my art is understood fully. People have walked into my exhibitions, looked at my art, and I would ask them, do you want me to explain? No. Thank you, I get it. But when I take my art to another side of the world or another society, it doesn't mean the West. I've exhibited in Japan, in China, in India. And there, you really have to put a little bit more extra effort, where you have to, first of all, decontextualize what an Arab woman is, what a Muslim woman is. And then in order to arrive to a space where they are looking at my work and my art as not as a project, a sociology project. No, it is art and is an expression. And maybe in this context of this webinar, knowledge production.
Manal, this is really, really amazing, honestly. And I think that just the analogy, or the reference, let's say, you made to your the story of your professors in university, and sort of asking you to to write a bit more clearly. And it really sort of shed light on, of course, also the way I teach, right? And the way sort of I deal with students from the region sometimes, and also other non-Western educated students, like the long sentences, the long paragraphs. And honestly, I had never thought of sort of the poetry in the language as such and what happens when we translate it. And I think this emphasis in your work sort of is a decolonial act in and of itself, because you're forcing us all to think about, like, why do we have to write in straightforward ways, you know? What happens when we fall back on what our minds and bodies are most used to, our tongues are most used to? And how does that look in an academic context? So thanks so much for highlighting that. And also how you're in a constant state of translation, right? Like you're always needing to translate. It's, you know, it's become almost a part of who you are. Anyway, that's another long conversation as well. But thanks so much for, you know, highlighting these points and, you know, sharing all that with us. Subhan, you want to go ahead?
I'm ready. Okay.
So your question, yes. So I have a question for you. So I guess it's the same as well. You're also living in the diaspora in the Midwest of the US, from what I understand. And I guess I also want to ask you how you navigate sort of yourself, your presence, right? Your body, yes, your thoughts, the questions of writing as well. I mean, you are in an academic context, so it's a bit different maybe from Manal's sort of living in flux, you know, neither here nor there. Sure. But if you could share, you know, bring us down to your life and sort of.
Sure. I think I navigate discussing and representing my work across borders and generations by embracing both the tensions and possibilities that emerge from the diasporic position, specifically mine as someone who has lived on 4 of the 7 continents in my lifetime. Born in Europe, lived in Africa, moved to Australia, and now find myself in the Midwest. So that entire time, one thing maintained, and that was my connection to my Somaliness, my intrinsic connection to my culture. So while I'm physically distant from Somalia, I find myself negotiating this relationship between my cultural memory and self-definition, who I am as a human being and who I am in my Somaliness. So when representing my work across generations, I first acknowledge the weight of the work of the elders of my community. I call it Hoyo's burden. Hoyo is mother in Somali, but the mother's burden of recognizing how first-generation Somalis of the diaspora, Somali women, have carried our cultures, our traditions, our moral, ethical values and practices without much recognition for that powerful work that they're doing in the diaspora. But I also struggle with what this means for future generations of women like me, who feel both the obligation to preserve culture and the desire for self-definition that might diverge from like traditional expectations of what it means to be Somali. The other, you know, border I tend to cross is intellectual, I would say, in its making, in that my methodological framework is literally, the name is Shahi Sheko, which means tea and story. So I'm working to sort of bridge these worlds and centering Black feminist epistemologies and Somali storytelling traditions by creating an approach that understands that cultural ways of knowing are synonymous with academic rigor. They are one and the same. And this presumption that you can't have flowery poetic language, or you can't talk about tea and story as oral history or what have you. So kind of pushing against, I would say, the border of academia alongside the border of generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Subhan. That's great to hear. Very, very helpful. Mina, if we could, also the question of working across borders, generations, and identities, that's what you all have in common. Maybe talk to us a little bit about how you define the knowledge you're producing. So Subhan, for example, I mean, I really love the idea of, you know, again, the decolonial knowledge, so cultural memory as a form of decolonial knowledge. Like we've been taught all of us, I'm assuming here in sort of in Western academic, in the Western academy, so to speak, right? And of course, our grandmother's stories are not proper knowledge. So, and we're in the process as academics and artists breaking out of this mold, right? So Mina, maybe you tell us a bit about how you conceive of this, right? And how you work on transmuting this knowledge that comes from the verbal transmission that you're concerned with, into sort of a more maybe fathomable content for wider audiences, whether at home or also in outside of Western Sahara.
Thank you, Hanan. And yes, I'm loving so much how all of this is really interacting with like this. It's different contexts and it's different geographies, but still there's that essence that is linking to everything. Yeah, so defining language, I mean knowledge, and that we have heavily based ourselves on decolonial knowledge production. Everything that we have known about ourselves, especially the things that is written about the region, most of it, all of the time, is this Orientalist view. This most of the time, it's very romanticizing the lived experiences of women and girls, and even all of the culture in its very hard aspect. So we tried as much as we can to view this from an outsider point of view, but also from our own point of view. Sometimes when I read something that is meant to be about my region or about my context or even country, most of the time it's very hard to finish it, because you'll see this someone who's going to bring in this romance, view about, oh my God, look at them, they look in the desert, they're just, they're vibing, and with no, I would say, respect, or at least there is no dignity given to these different identities that exist in this context. So how we have defined ourselves is basically just referring to what we know. As I have said before in a different discussion with everyone here, is that most of the knowledge, I think this is something that we all share, most of the knowledge that we know in our context, or at least in the African context, is verbally transmuted. It's said to us and it's told to us by our grandmothers, our grandfathers. It's stories about the elders that is shared around, small tea ceremonies or in different, situations when something happens, and that is being shared. And along the way also, with a lot of the effect that goes from globalization to these communities, we ourselves lose also, I would say, the respect for that knowledge. We see it as just stories. So there was this big struggle to try and find the communal ground that we look at it the same way. We look at the knowledge that is coming from academia from all over the world in different languages, and we look at these verbal stories that comes from our own communities the same way. These also have knowledge. These also have how we live, how we interact with other people, stories about respect, about dignity, about how to identify yourself even in the community, and how to support also others, and how to be a pillar in your community. It's the same thing. It's just one is academic and is written and it has a long process, and one is passed to you in a very warm, I would say, setting, with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. But that's where we struggled the most, is how do we overcome that idea that has been ingrained in us from past colonialism, from even the current systems that we are educated in, that still views this as a non-knowledge, or it's not accredited as it should be. And through also the work in the feminist movement that I am in right now, we tried as much as we can to bring back that culture practice in the movement. Let's sit down. Let's even sometimes which is very helpful in Zoom settings and in Google Meets, where we just come in from different time zones and we sit down and we talk. This happens. What do you feel about it? What do you think? What does it remind you of? And we try as much as we can to gather all of that and write it. And it's a very delicate process, but it's a very also informative, because you end up with such rich texts, such rich perspectives from different, sometimes I will see it from a different, perspective, from just class or academic perspective, but someone else will see it from a very different view. And that doesn't just enriches the text, but it's also amazing for others to understand understand, and sometimes for them to understand, but also to connect to these different views from the culture. So I would stop here. I think I went over time, but yes.
Please
so
go ahead. We have a bit more time if you wanted to say anything else.
Okay, amazing. But I just wanted to add that it's still an active practice. It's not something that is done in one day or in 1 year. This, I wouldn't call it here. I would call that, I wouldn't call it healing, but I would call it a type of, removing these, shards of colonial perspectives that have been ingrained in us from the educational system, from the culture that we receive, from pop culture, from songs, from shows, even from our own production in TVs and in culture materials. But it's become very, very blurry to detach what is colonial and what is the culture itself, because it has become so infused in even the most common conversation that you can do, which is in a taxi or in a store or something. But yeah, that the decolonial process is very hard, but it's something that is very, very important to the knowledge production in the region, specifically the feminist knowledge production in the region, because when we, the last point is that most of the time when it comes to feminism, we are struggling also with this view about the Arab woman or the Arabic speaking woman. How should that woman be? It's always the resilient, strong, or this, view about Orientalists, soft and whatever. But you cannot find the different shades of the woman that we actually know, that we actually identify with in this knowledge that is brought in today. So we try as much as we can to reevaluate ourselves, criticize ourselves more and more, and in communal and collective settings. But it's a process, but it's still an important process of the knowledge production.
Thank you so much, Mina, for bringing up the decolonial process, so to speak, and actually how convoluted and long it is, right? And how it takes time. And I think, maybe also just a point is, a lot of these stereotypes as well, people, women of the region also, like you say, believe them sometimes about themselves because it's so deeply ingrained, right? And we've all been schooled in more or less some kind of Western education or Western systemic approaches to education, right? In some sense, because the schooling that came with the colonial presence or context taught certain methods to children. We all watch certain TVs, certain media about ourselves that tell us about ourselves, so to speak. So your work on the ground, actually all three of you, is really about the nitty-gritty of that, like how to deconstruct that. Like even when you're speaking sometimes to, declared feminists in the region, like how do you show, or how do you also, without coming across as arrogant or without coming across as knowing better because you live in the diaspora or you travel between, or you have the ability to travel. It's really a delicate process, and I really sort of appreciate very much your involvement in this kind of project. And I hope the audience can see actually what an important project it is that you're all, and increasingly women in the region are partaking in, both as culture producers and I think scholars, right? There's so much we have to work through, so much. Maybe actually this leads to sort of one of my last questions, maybe my last question, depending on time. It's about the role of women, right, in your society or the region or diaspora community in which you're living, the role as knowledge producers. And why do you think, or why in your thinking is it obscured, concealed in the Western popular psyche? So each of you, what is it? What is at work here? I mean, we know the media, the politicians, all of that, but what else is at work here? Is it sort of people's refusal to see the Arab woman as, on an equal footing, or not as a non-victim, or what is it that obscures this image of what you describe? Why is it so unclear, and how long will it take?
Oh, I don't have the answer for how long will it take, Hanan. There's something that I find interesting when I read about my artworks, like when critics or newspapers write about my work in the West. they constantly describe my work as brave, rather than what I would love is like, it's brilliant, it's moving. There's this constant need for me to be a victim, and you used that word just a minute ago. They lean on this victimhood, and it's somehow, I feel like they cannot even imagine that a Saudi woman, Saudi women in general, or Arab women, can be the architects of their own knowledge, liberation, and solidarity. It's just impossible. It has to come from another source to support this. So, of course, whatever knowledge production we make, it's really measured against what exists outside of our societies. There's also, the colonization mindset, and this idea of a land without a people. Same. So it's a land without any ideas. We exist in a space that is just empty, and it's impossible to. So I studied abroad. I studied in America and in the UK, and I've never come across any in my studies in art school feminist writers, Arab feminist writers. It was very difficult. I had to dig deep and find this. I had to, look at my auntie's bookshelves and find these books hidden of Fatima Mernissi and Saad. And so, yeah, this is very, very strange space where my art can sit side by side in institutions, in museums, but with artworks that are made by Western women. But my work is spoken about and looked at in a very different way. And I think this is a way of keeping my art outside of, for example, feminist art or, the larger movements of art. And they love to put me in that little category that is, cute Middle Eastern people who are coming in and, look how brave they are, trying hard. And that for me is very, very, very annoying and frustrating.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. Subhan, Subhan.
Yes, I think Western frames of knowledge often privilege formal education over cultural knowledge transmission. So that's what is rendering invisible what I believe is profound intellectual work of the Somali women of the diaspora. Because they are maintaining our culture. Literally, I have spent a year of my life in Somalia. I can speak it fluently. I can cook a mean goat stew. I know how to make the rice, and these are all things my mother intentionally infused, imposed, engaged with to ensure myself, my sister, my brother to some degree, we're learning and understanding about our responsibility to our culture and community. But domestic labor, cultural preservation, performed predominantly by women, to transfer culture to their children in a global setting, rarely recognized as knowledge production, despite its essential role in the communities and cultural continuity. So without this, we wouldn't have that breadth and depth and of diversity and belonging and a sense of belonging even outside of Somalia. So again, it's also compounded by, an oversight is also compounded by Orientalist and colonial framings of Muslim women and their capacity, denying their agency, intellectual contributions. There's this presumption that they are, I don't know, I can't speak for all, Muslim communities, but we say we're a patriarchy, but who's really in charge in the home, So truthfully, that the matriarchy rolls deep, and this isn't something that is known or shared. As Manal was saying, it's kind of like boxed in this capacity for our, for us to be feminist, for us to be bold is again, it's in the art that Manal is doing, not necessarily in our daily living, So that's kind of where I think the work is. And I believe that just continuing to tell these stories can hold the weight and history of communities in ways that are restorative for us. So.
Thank you, Suban. Thank you so much. Mina, if you want to
I'll keep it brief.
share with us.
Actually, your question about like what is it? What is it?
Yeah.
The way that you have repeated
Are
it,
we stuck?
I
I
love it.
sometimes feel like we're stuck. Yeah.
But that is definitely the question. Like, what is it? What is what is creating this vision? Why are we still stuck in this? Also, in this view, and I think that Manal and Suban have articulated it very, very beautifully, and that's where the reason also lies. And I think, from my perspective, there's also a kind of hesitation to change the view, to change that the way that we are seeing these different communities from the West, the way that we are also challenging ourselves, that the knowledge that we know, the knowledge that we have grown with in the West or in different other region is not necessarily the same in another region or another country or a continent. I myself also, well, even in the African context, you are constantly amazed by the different practices with knowledge production, with knowledge transmission. You're constantly also amazed by the way women are taking charge, and the stories also that are drifting to us from our ancestors, from our history. The most prominent woman that I have grew up close to was a woman from my community that didn't know how to write or didn't know how to read, but she could drive, and she was the first woman who became a very, very successful entrepreneur, and she challenged a lot of norms. But at the end of the day, the society is not going to be is not against that form. You see it in the way that people speak about it, with even women, men. They speak about these type of women with like such such pride, but when it comes to someone else from the West, I'm like, oh my God, how brave she was to come up and do all of these things. But I think the hesitation from the West side to adapt a new lens to see different communities, adapt a new type of also acceptance, not the acceptance that we see today, that is like, oh my God, I appreciate this is such. I'm not going to touch on this because that's a very, very different also experience. But still, there is a hesitation to change the lens, even after a lot of years and a lot of decades with people from the region, in the diaspora specifically, trying to challenge that narrative and trying to get the people to adapt a new way of viewing these communities and viewing art and viewing knowledge in a different aspect, and trying to also say, at the end of the day, it's not the same situation for everyone, and it's not the same image that you see on your media that is the reality that is in those contexts and those communities. But I think what it is, it's Orientalism, it's colonialism, and it's also a lot of hesitation to actually see people that are just the same as you, but in different backgrounds and in different light. Yeah, that's what I think. Back to you, Hanan.
No, thank you so much, Mina, for that. And maybe just to add to all three of you, like we also really need to think about sort of the larger struggle for women, right? Like we also have to remember, people assume honor crimes, as an example, is something that, only takes place in Arab countries. This continued in the Eastern Mediterranean, in Cyprus and Greece and Italy until the 1970s, So, I think in general, there's a struggle for women, right? An empowerment struggle and all of that ongoing, even in the West today. And we forget that. It's so easy to look at another region and say, oh, look how they treat their women. Oh, those poor women, look at those victims, that whole thing, the sort of the depictions that Manal spoke of. Anyway, this has been amazing. I just want to maybe sort of say one thing also in tribute to our Palestinian sisters and the genocide ongoing. I have to bring this up. I'm hearing you all talk about storytelling, oral history, sort of knowledge production. And I'm very, very happy about one thing, that I see an amazing potential in sort of South-South knowledge here, right? So our amazing sisters back there who are fighting daily, who are having to bury their children, in this ongoing genocide, this is what they'll have, right? That's the most extreme case of oppression and colonialism. But this is what they're going to have, and this is what they're going to have going forward. Our grandmothers already told the story of Palestine in 1948, right? Through the methods that you amazing women described here. Hearing you all I kept thinking was, this touches on what they're going through and how they're going to, those who are to remain alive, how they're going to continue to tell their story, right? What will they teach us? And I think a lot of what you described here is some of what they will have to carry forward as well. So thank you so much for this amazing sort of enlightening conversation. And I think that touches on so many themes. And I'm actually very, very sad that, you know, this can't go on much longer. I know we have questions from the audience. Oh, okay, hold on. Let me just see, there's a lot of questions. Okay, so maybe I'll start with the first one. And whoever feels like answering it can possibly go ahead. So how do you have a question, hold on, yeah, okay. So how do you see the future of Arab women in the current environment? What are the efforts to be inclusive of other communities that find an affinity to Arab cultures through shared experiences? Who would like to give this a go? Sorry. There's a weird, do you see? So, okay, we can pass on this. There's another question as well. How do you see the future of Arab women in the current environment?
I can touch on that briefly, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead, Mina.
So I think in the recent 5 years, or maybe even the last decade, there has been a lot of mobilizing in the Arab world, in the Arabic-speaking movement. You will not see it as much because mostly we operate in Arabic and in very small circles because of accessibility issues, of course, because of surveillance, because of many factors that render it impossible actually for the work to be done at the end of the day. When it comes to the movement at the moment, a lot of the mobilization, the advocacy that is happening, it's in this media spaces, it's in social media. We live in very difficult and under very hostile political systems to make it possible to get to the ground and do a lot of work. So you'll see a lot of movement that are basically operating online. I would like to also say that there's a lot of also knowledge production when it comes to capturing the situations of women and girls that under these different political systems, but also under conflict and war. And here I would like to mention the efforts and the work of Sudanese women during the war, even before the war, during the revolution, and also the Palestinian movement in Gaza. There's a lot of amazing mobilization from women, from feminists, from people from the region to render that visible. But also in the last 2 years, especially since the genocide has started, something that before wasn't really seen in the feminist movement, it's how we adapt decoloniality in its aspect of adopting a narrative against colonialism, against active occupations. And now in these last 2 years, you'll find a lot of amazing work by people in the region regarding that, regarding how feminism, how occupation and colonialism is at the end of the day a feminist issue. Women living under war, women living under conflicts are also important to bring forward, or also important to share their knowledge, to share the situation that they live under. So the future of the movement, even giving the very hard and the very traumatic experiences that are now being shed in the that are now being lived, I mean, in the region, they are still persisting and they are still resisting and surviving, and also making sure that their voices are heard by their own selves. No one is speaking for them, but they are also speaking for themselves, and they're making it and they're making the effort to take the space back. And here I would love to nudge people to check a lot of the writings from Sudanese feminists. Most of it is in Arabic, but still a lot of now I think the only aspect of good AI is that we have good translation websites. So everything is visible right now. Everything can be translated and can be learned. And I nudge people to also check that out. Even if it's in another language, it's still at the end being possible to translate it and to learn about it. So I think the future holds a lot of hope, even though we are living in a very, very difficult time, but we are still hoping that our communities are going to survive, are going to be liberated, and are going to have a chance to actually live, to see themselves building their communities and building their futures.
Thank you, Mina. There's another question here, actually, that I'd very much like to share. So it's so the person's asking, outside of the Western views of women, how are you combating our own people's internalized misogynist views of women? I'm not a quote unquote typical Arab and find most of my work is battling my own people. So who would like to give this a go? Go ahead.
Battling is a bit too aggressive, especially for the language of art, in my art specifically. But I think we do these structures. We are going through right now in the whole of the region, I think, and specifically in the Gulf region, really fast, rapid social change. And we have these entrenched patriarchal systems. And it's just this, it just doesn't mesh, it doesn't work. And I think it might be breaking itself. It's causing its own damage because it faces each other. There's this move towards this way, and there's a move that wants to just stay in one place. And if you can produce work, and this is what my target is, when I put an artwork on a wall, my true dream is not someone to look at it and say, oh, this is very nice, it's very beautiful. I would love for somebody to ask a question, to maybe get a little bit upset and like, I don't like it, and then have a conversation about why they don't like it. And these are sort of nuanced spaces where I'm not in the region, in the Middle East. It's very hard for me to face these topics head on and battle them. But I work in an opaque space, and these opaque spaces, which I already addressed, which was the flowery language, presenting things that have dual meanings, are very important. And I think arts and culture really are now becoming important in our society. Where I started my story by saying that I did not see any museums, galleries, I didn't have an artist to look up to. Today, there's a huge investment in art and culture in the region. For whatever reasons, they chose to invest in art and culture, but that opens a door for a certain type of knowledge production that is not the usual. So the written word, the book, that only some people can access it, not everyone. Academia, inaccessible for me or for the regular woman on the street. But I think film, contemporary art, are spaces where conversations can happen. Where will this lead? We don't know. But right today, I can tell you that a lot of my artworks up until 2016, everything I've made until 2016 is considered historical. It doesn't exist. The things that I was like, battling, the women's names, guardianship, we had teacher deaths. This is one of my projects called Crash, where I address women dying in car crashes while on their way to teach. These have been resolved. Is it because of my art? I don't think so. But there are different sort of people coming in culturally that shift the narrative, push society in a direction where they can actually open up and talk about things. And it's easy to talk about an artwork than to talk about a statement that's written in an article in the newspaper. It's much more easier to say, I see it this way. Maybe you see it differently, but I see it this way. And it creates a space of negotiation. Now you can navigate very, very difficult topics through this kind of language of visual arts. I don't know, this is...
I would love to touch on it very quickly.
Yeah,
too.
go ahead, please, Subhan.
There was a moment in, back when X was Twitter, I was, again, doing research around how Somali women were moving in there. But back in Somalia, there's the Mogadishu Book Fair. And I looked at the lineup. I can't remember what year. It's probably pre-pandemic. And we have so many prolific, well-known writers that are women, you know, in our community, and none were invited. No scholars, no one, not the academics and not the creative, you know, kind of the well-known writers. And so I called them into question out on Twitter and tagged all the women I thought should have been invited. So it generated a conversation and shifted the landscape of the Mogadishu Book Fair, where they eventually changed it up and started inviting women. So it's, again, little by little, misogyny it's a big fight. Like you said, a battle isn't necessarily the outcome, but to call it out and say, hey, you know, why are we not addressing this, or why are we not looking at how much they are serving our community and culture at the same time, and maintaining this structure that seems it isn't working anyway, you know? So that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Suban. I do think we have time for one more question, a very interesting question, actually. So if anybody wants to try and give it a go, it would be awesome. So they're asking, what is being done to raise the voices of disabled women and girls, especially as people are being disabled during the genocide? Does anybody want to? Yeah, go ahead.
I can have a very, very short answer to that. It's that, especially now when we're talking about the genocide in Gaza and the disabled accidents that are happening during the, like, we're talking about a massive genocide that has resulted in very, very I cannot even find the words to describe the amount of pain that has been inflicted on the region. But some of the work that has been done, I think I came across this informative a few weeks ago, and it's highlighting actually the number of people who are now disabled due to the war. And we're talking about this also in the context that the region, the Gaza itself, is still being held off of any kind of aid. So you're talking about people who are under war, who are losing family members in the most brutal way, but also have absolutely no aid when it comes to treating these kind of casualties. This is the reality that is now being lived in the Gaza Strip, it's being also as much as this should have all of the importance that it deserves, but it's also being absorbed in the reality that there's too much happening for one thing to get the attention, especially when we talk about disability rights and the aid and the care that they should deserve, because you're talking about a place that is literally being cut off from the rest of the world, that is just being killed on a daily basis. But on another note, there has been a lot of mobilization previously in the previous years from various activists. I take this also to remember a dear colleague and a friend of mine, Ru'a from Sudan, who has been an advocate for disabled rights and for disabled rights also in the feminist context and in the Sudanese context as well. We have lost her during the war, sadly, but there's a lot of writings and there's a lot of mobilizing, especially when it comes to this aspect. I can share some of the resources here in the chat because I have the web open, but just to note that, especially when it comes to genocide, a lot of when the genocide is happening, so it's very, very not, it's not easy to see a mobilization happening in this specific thematic. But I have seen some of the infographics shared about, especially in kids that have lost a lot during the war. But I can share some of the links that I have in Arabic about the thematic.
Thank you so much, Mina. Thank you for that, for sharing all this. But also, just to add maybe to Mina, I think if none of the speakers want to say anything, do you, Suba or Manal, on this? Subhana? just to add maybe to Mina, that there is in general, also besides just what's happening now, has been movement in this field in the entire region, actually, especially through the work of, local NGOs and also international NGOs, Of course, there's a politics to all of that. What kind of organizations gets money for what kind of equipment to help, and who has the access to education, all of that. There's the politics of aid behind it. But in general, as sort of Manal actually touched upon, these societies are in flux. We forget that, right? We're constantly changing societies. This is what we're talking about here. So yes, in terms of disability in women and girls, movements in the movement, if you can call it a movement in the region, is somewhere else than where it was, even 20 years ago or 15 years ago. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of increased information, advocacy around this issue. So yeah. Does anybody want to add anything as sort of concluding thoughts to share with our audience? I don't think we have any time for questions anymore, but maybe if you want to share something or like a final thought or comment, any of you. No, you're good? Thank you so much to the three of you. It's been so awesome listening to you. And I honestly can imagine myself sitting with each of you for like over at least 3 hours, discussing so much of what you brought up. And thank you for sharing your thoughts with the audience and opening up actually to the audience about your concerns and fears and, the things that move you and animate you. It's been awesome. Thank you. Basima.
Thank you, Hanan.
Go ahead. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hanan. Thank you, Hanan. Thank you, Subin, Manal, Mina, for spending this time with us and for this rich conversation. I learned so much, and I deeply appreciate hearing your personal journeys, learning about your brilliant work, your role as translators and archivists of culture, knowledge, struggles, and communities across borders and generations, and how your work engages a local context as well as a regional and global context. So again, thank you so much. It was an honor to be a part of this conversation, and looking forward to many, as Hanan said, I could definitely spend much more time talking with each one of you. So more to come for sure. As we close out, I just want to make a brief announcement about 2 upcoming events that the Global South Lab is organizing on April 23rd at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time in recognition of the 70th anniversary of the Bandung Conference, which for those who aren't familiar with the conference, it was a historic meeting of 29 Asian and African nations that challenged the consequences of European colonialism, and that laid the groundwork for a more equitable global order to empower global South nations on the international stage. So the event that we're organizing is going to bring experts together to be in discussion about the legacy of the Bandung Conference and to unite our history with our present and to imagine a future where everyone and everything belongs. Again, that's going to be on April 23rd, and we will send out a notification for that. And then the last webinar of this series, the Arab Women and Feminist Visions for Equity and Belonging webinar series, will be on May 6th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And that session will be focused on the critical role of Arab women and feminists in the struggle for sustainable development, climate justice, land rights, food justice, and sovereignty in the Arab region. The recording for this event will be published on the Othering and Belonging Institute's website. And again, for both of these events that I just mentioned, we will send out email notifications and invites. And we hope that you enjoyed the session and that you can join the upcoming events that we have planned. Thank you all so much for joining, and thank you everyone for being here with us today.